In the early days of automotive history, cars were designed with minimal safety features, making them veritable death traps. From rumble seats to non-collapsible steering columns, these vintage rides pose severe risks. Join us as we delve into why classic cars were so dangerous. Rumble seats, also called dicky seats or mother-in-law seats, were a unique feature in early cars. These small cushioned seats folded into the rear of roadsters or coupes and allowed one or two passengers to sit outside, exposed to the weather, just above the rear wheels. The term rumble likely came from the rough ride caused by their position above live axles with wooden rims. Before World War I, these seats didn't always fold into the car's body. They were considered dangerous because they offered no protection, and advancements in car design eventually led to their decline. Rumble seats offered a unique ride experience, but how did tire technology evolve to improve comfort and safety? Bias ply tires. In the early days of cars, bias ply tires were common. Invented in the late 1800s and successfully produced by Philip Strauss in 1911, these tires had a unique construction. Made of rubber and crisscrossed cords at 60-degree angles, they offered durability and comfort by absorbing road shocks. Bias ply tires were popular in the mid-20th century, seen on many classic cars. Despite their popularity, they had significant issues, such as slow steering response, reduced grip, and heat buildup that caused wear and blowouts. By the 1960s, the tire industry shifted to radial tires, which improved handling and stability, with cords placed at 90-degree angles to reduce heat buildup. Bias ply tires made driving more comfortable, but how did headlight control evolve? Floor-mounted headlight dimmers. Controlling headlights used to be tricky. In 1925, the Guide Lamp Company introduced the two-filament headlight bulb, allowing drivers to switch between low and high beams using a switch on the steering column. By 1927, the dimmer switch moved to the floorboard, where drivers tapped a foot switch under the dash to change the beams. While this method seemed unique, it had its dangers. Drivers needed to take their foot off the gas pedal to dim the lights, causing a critical delay in emergencies. The floorboard switches were also vulnerable to accidental kicks or damage. By the 1970s, car designers realized the risk and removed the dimmer switch back to the steering column or stalk, improving safety. With the shift to safer steering column dimmers, what other crucial safety innovations followed? The Mansfield bar, also called the rear underrun protection system, was a metal feature that hung from the back of semi-truck trailers, serving as an underride guard. It aimed to stop smaller cars from sliding underneath large trucks and rear-end collisions. The bar got its name from a tragic accident in 1967 when Hollywood star Jane Mansfield's Buick Electra 225 crashed into a tractor-trailer without an RUPS. The impact pulled Mansfield and two others under the trailer, leading to their deaths. This accident spurred the creation of these bars to prevent rollovers and decapitations in crashes. The Mansfield bar transformed truck safety after a tragic accident. Could the same be said for the dramatic shift away from suicide doors? In the early 20th century, suicide doors became popular among manufacturers like Rolls-Royce, Lincoln, and Ford Thunderbird. The term suicide referred to the risk of passengers falling out if the door latch failed or if the door unexpectedly swung open while driving. Despite these dangers, these doors added a touch of elegance and sophistication, symbolizing luxury and exclusivity. Stepping out of a vintage Cadillac Eldorado or a classic Mercedes-Benz 600 Pullman with such doors was pure Hollywood glamour. However, due to serious safety concerns, automakers eventually phased out suicide doors to prevent accidents or injuries. As the elegance of suicide doors faded, did you ever consider how safety features like seatbelts emerged? In the early days of cars, there was a serious lack of seatbelts. As a matter of fact, they were almost unheard of. It was not until the late 1950s that they became standard equipment. Some cars in the 1930s had lap belts, but they were rarely used. These early lap belts helped prevent passengers from being thrown out during a crash, but they did not protect their heads or torsos. Nash Motors from Wisconsin made a bold move by offering seatbelts in 1949, but many argued they could cause internal injuries, hinder escape from submerged cars, and might fail. Seatbelts became mandatory in all new U.S. vehicles in 1968 after an engineer at Volvo created the three-point seatbelt design we know today. While seatbelts were a significant step forward, can you imagine how cars managed before airbags? Before airbags became standard, classic cars didn't have these life-saving cushions. Airbags, which are fabric cushions that deploy quickly, were not introduced until about 50 years ago. Since their introduction, frontal airbags saved over 50,000 lives in the U.S., cutting driver deaths by 29% in head-on crashes and reducing front seat passenger deaths by 32% for people aged 13 and older. Early cars lacked this vital safety feature, leaving occupants unprotected. When a crash occurred, sensors now measured impact severity and deployed the airbags in less than 0.05 seconds. Yet, airbags faced issues, such as the Takata recall, where defective airbags sprayed metal fragments, causing injuries and death. While airbags revolutionized car safety, non-collapsible steering columns. In the early to mid-20th century, car safety was much less advanced than it is today. Car advertisements emphasized looks rather than safety features, comparing cars to women's hats that needed to be attractive. Hugh D. Haven, who survived a plane crash, realized that better protection for drivers during collisions was possible. A major problem was non-collapsing steering columns, which could impale drivers in crashes. Thankfully, collapsible steering columns were introduced. General Motors pioneered this technology in 1967 with two-piece columns that crumpled under pressure, absorbing energy and saving lives. By 2012, this technology had prevented nearly 80,000 deaths, and now all vehicles must have collapsible steering columns to ensure safety. Having seen how collapsible steering columns revolutionized car safety, what about the dangers posed by hard interior surfaces? The dashboard, originally made of wood or leather, was placed at the front of carriages to protect passengers from mud, water, and debris kicked up by horses. It acted as a shield. When motor vehicles arrived, the term dashboard carried over. Early car dashboards kept the same design as carriages, separating the driver from the engine. These dashboards were simple panels, often made from wood or metal, and featured basic controls like a simple speedometer and steering wheel. They lacked padding and safety features, making them dangerous in accidents. Hard metal dashboards and unpadded steering wheels could cause severe injuries during crashes. Automakers, like General Motors, focused more on highway safety research than vehicle safety during the 1960s, unintentionally maintaining risky dashboard designs. While drum brakes, once common in older cars, have an interesting history. The idea started in the early 1900s when Maybach first used them in 1900. These brakes worked by creating friction between shoes and a rotating drum to slow the vehicle. They faced problems with heat dissipation. The friction during braking made the drum very hot, which reduced braking effectiveness, especially during heavy use. Drivers needed to frequently adjust them to maintain performance. A breakthrough came in 1953 when Jaguar introduced disc brakes at Le Mans, which offered better stopping power and gradually replaced drum brakes on front wheels. Drum brakes revolutionized vehicle safety. But how did early crash designs leave passengers vulnerable? No crumple zones. In the early days of automotive design, cars lacked crumple zones, making them quite dangerous in crashes. These older vehicles were built with rigid frames and solid structures that didn't absorb the impact energy from collisions. Instead of crumpling to absorb some of the crash force, the entire impact force was transferred directly to the passengers, often resulting in severe injuries. This design flaw highlighted the need for modern crumple zones, which now help to distribute and absorb energy during a crash, significantly enhancing passenger safety. For instance, the 1950s Chevrolet Bel Air, a popular classic, lacked such features and is a prime example of these early safety shortcomings. With crumple zones revolutionizing car safety, could improved head restraints be the next crucial advancement? In the early 90s, head restraints were often an afterthought. Imagine driving down a dusty road in an old car, the wind blowing through your hair when suddenly you're rear-ended. Without a headrest, your head gets jolted painfully. Early cars had minimal headrests, which were often just strips of leather or fabric, barely offering any protection. Passengers were at risk of whiplash from rear-end collisions. It was like riding in a roller coaster without a safety harness. Exciting but unsafe. Thankfully, modern vehicles now have adjustable headrests to help prevent whiplash injuries. Without the safety of modern headrests, early drivers were at constant risk. But how did the advent of anti-lock braking systems revolutionize vehicle safety even further? Before anti-lock braking systems, or ABS, came along, stopping a car in an emergency was like trying to dance on ice while wearing roller skates. ABS technology began with aircraft safety systems, but didn't appear in cars until the late 1970s. In those days, when drivers slammed on the brakes, the wheels could lock up, leading to skids and loss of control. ABS transformed this by preventing wheel lockup during braking. Sensors on each wheel controlled brake pressure, ensuring the tires stayed in contact with the road. This change eliminated wild skids and made stopping smoother, though some drivers found ABS inconsistent under normal conditions. How did older single-circuit systems fare? Older cars with single-circuit braking systems were notorious for their safety risks. In these vehicles, all braking components were linked in one single circuit. This meant that if any part of the brake system, like a line or a cylinder, failed, it could lead to a complete brake failure, leaving the driver with little to no stopping power. Introduced in the early 20th century, this design was cheaper and simpler but lacked redundancy. The potential for a total loss of braking was a serious hazard, especially on long drives or during high-speed maneuvers. Modern cars use dual-circuit systems for better safety. The lack of redundancy in single-circuit braking systems left drivers vulnerable. What other safety flaws were common in early cars? How about thin or weak seat frames? Back then, car seats were often made with thin or weak frames. These flimsy frames were a major safety risk because they could easily collapse or break during a crash, leading to severe injuries for passengers. This issue began in the early to mid-20th century, when car manufacturers focused more on saving money and appearance than on safety. Unlike today's cars, which have strong crash-tested seats, older vehicles lack the necessary protection. The absence of seatbelts made it more likely for passengers to be thrown around or ejected, increasing the fatality rates in car accidents during that time. Classic cars were often dangerous due to their flimsy seat frames and lack of safety features. Do you think modern safety advancements are enough to prevent such dangers? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe for more content.